So it should say record.
Yep, it's going.
Does it look like it's recording? Okay, what is the first thing you want me to do?
Tell me who you are.
My name is Faith Gibson. I'm a licensed midwife in California. Before becoming a licensed midwife in California, I was first off a religious practitioner. Before that, I was a lay midwife, and before that, I was a labor and delivery room nurse. And before that, I was a high school student, I guess. You know.
Good. Tell me why licensure has been important to you, midwifery licensure.
That gets cut out where somebody starts to talk and then doesn't. The goes. Magic of editing, I love it. I was a labor and delivery room nurse and an ER nurse before I got involved in providing midwifery care. As a nurse, what I did was lawful. There wasn't any great controversy about it. It was respected. I didn't have to worry about getting arrested. It was just what you did as a profession to provide care to people. I had a hard time transitioning to the idea that somehow or another that if I provided care as a midwife that I had to be a renegade, that I had to be willing to be in a position of being vulnerable to being arrested, to being charged if there was a bad outcome, that I could be charged with murder. All of the issues that go along with being unlicensed in a culture that licenses everyone and everything else. It's different if you're Adam and Eve. We were not. We were way past Adam and Eve. So for me, licensing my question was, why aren't we licensing midwives? Why aren't we having midwifery training programs? Why don't midwives have hospital privileges if they prefer to provide care in a hospital environment? I just, to some extent, was rather naive at the beginning because I moved to California and got involved in the quote lay midwifery movement. But even when I became involved in midwifery politics in California, we had already that spectrum of the political push in California had moved from lay midwifery into trying to get licensing so that our midwives could stop arresting our midwives and hauling them off in handcuffs. And anyway, so that was my reason. It wasn't real complicated. I didn't have a kind of what you call a philosophical position on it. It was pretty pragmatic. Why not have training? Why not have licensing? Why not treat us like ordinary, normal people as opposed to pariahs?
So we've looked at a lot of different ways that midwifery licensure can be a bad model for midwives and for women. Can you tell me about any specific licensure laws that you are aware of that would be sort of a good model to keep women in the forefront of being decision makers and also be protective for the midwife-client relationship?
Well, first off, I would say probably the biggest problem with midwifery licensing laws is the lack of them. Once a midwifery licensing law gets passed, then the next biggest problem is that it's very restrictive. Is that it can be restrictive in a number of ways. It can be restrictive because, for example, it requires you to have a Bachelor of Science in order to qualify. A lot of women are never, at least for the kind of midwifery that people like myself do, which is a direct entry midwife, and I'm providing care primarily in out-of-hospital locations and home births and the like. We aren't titrating IVs on people. We're not managing epidurals, those kinds of things. That having a Bachelor of Science degree just simply cuts out an awful lot of people who are very good with their hands, very good with their people skills are very good, but they don't sit in chairs in libraries and do research for endless, hours and days and weeks and months and years very well. So they don't make those kinds of students. They're not their temperament is not that. So having midwifery laws that restrict access by having the educational process be very complex and lengthy, that means that women who already have children it's very hard for them to go. Women who don't have a lot of economic resources, particularly single mothers with children, for example, would be one of those areas that it's really easy to use the educational end of midwifery licensing, the educational process as a way to make it very complex and expensive and lengthy and go on for forever. And none of that has a whole heck of a lot to do with providing good care to childbearing women. So the next thing would be the restrictions that put the midwife in the position of being a perinatal policeman. So those are laws that say, well, you're licensed to provide midwifery care to childbearing women unless they're under 16 years of age, or they're over 40 years of age, or they have a history of God knows what in their family, or they had a previous postpartum hemorrhage, or heaven forbid that they've had a previous cesarean, or that their baby is breech, or that they're having twins, or I don't know, rupture of membranes, that somebody thinks their baby may weigh more than 4,000 grams, on and on and on, where there's all this kind of, I would describe it as micromanaging, and I think that the distinction that's useful here is that there's a big difference between someone who has a complication versus someone who has a risk of developing a complication. And the medical model tends to not make that, to conflate that distinction and treat the risk of a complication, especially in obstetrics, as if you had the complication. In other words, the whole thing that happens to women when they get admitted to the hospital and we start an IV on them just in case they bleed. I mean, every woman has a risk of bleeding, so we'll start an IV on everybody. And they, there's a small risk of some kind of fetal distress, so we'll do fetal monitoring. There's all these things where we start treating the risk of something as if it's the something that you already had. And so I don't want midwives to be a midwifery licensing laws that put midwives in the position of being a perinatal policeman. Hold on just one second. You can push pause for just a second. If you